surrounding Donald Trump, especially in government now, not just campaign history, try to cordon this off. We saw that with Cambridge Analytica last week because there was very dodgy dealings with WikiLeaks. You can see that here. The question being, these conspiracies and these ongoing activities, who knew what when? Or Howard Baker's famous question in Watergate, what did the president know and when did he know it? I will also point here, as I'm just digesting the indictment, Gates accused of false statements about all this. Again, that goes to intent and whether not only did you do something and you thought it was right, but no, you did it, maybe you knew it was wrong, and so you started telling other people false information to try to cover it up. All of this going, again, it's not about collusion at this juncture, but the word collusion is not a crime. Conspiracy is, and there are explicit references here to Yanukovych, who is a Putin ally that figures into all this. So while it is not on the level of conspiring to tip an election, and we're not there, the backdrop of that, this is not unrelated in the sense that there are a lot of Russian dealings. And as I mentioned at the top of your show, Mr. Gates was the person that Paul Manafort used to send to Moscow. Now, it is legal to go to Moscow, but there's a lot of now illegal acts alleged here.
My take here is that, just like Ari said, this is a wide-ranging investigation. The mere fact that there's an indictment and we only have 2 defendants so far probably just goes to a statute of limitations issue. Most federal crimes have a 5-year statute of limitations, and if they were running up on that time limit, then they've got to indict. In fact, a lot of times they will seal the indictment, and that will pause the statute of limitations, and they can unseal it after the statute is even run. Doesn't look like that's what happened in this case, but that's one of the techniques. The more secret that the prosecution can keep this investigation, the better. Based on if this was a statute issue, Mueller's team probably indicted with a bit of frustration because they would have liked to have kept this secret for as long as they possibly could.
There are just so many questions that need to get answered. I mean, you can go back to Don Jr. and Eric. Don Jr. back in 2013 saying at a real estate conference that they don't need U.S. investors. They get so much of their financing from Russians. Eric made a similar statement to a golf reporter just a couple of years ago. And President Trump has repeatedly said, I have no investments in Russia. There were no questions about whether or not the president invested in Russia. It was always, has Russian money influenced or financed the Trump family and helped them? And I turn you to Jared Kushner, who during the campaign on a road trip met with a prominent Russian banker. And we know that Russian banks are closely tied and integrated to the Russian government. That is Vladimir Putin, who we have to point out is one of the richest men in the world.
And you're raising a point that goes to count 10 in this new indictment of Paul Manafort and Mr. Gates. The unregistered agent of a foreign principal. Not in this case Russia, in this case Ukraine, a Russian satellite. But this is something that's very interesting because our research shows that you rarely see indictments or jailing on the Foreign Agents Registration Act.
Almost never.
People consider
Say that again, say that again.
So the U.S. government law requires that if you work for Ukraine, you have to say so. You can do it, but you have a federal legal obligation to say so. You can't secretly do it. This alleges that both of these individuals, Gates and Manafort, were secretly working for Ukraine. Well, in this case, Yanukovych, but it's a party leader there in Ukraine and a former head of state. And this is an allegation that they failed to report that. This is also something that Tony Podesta has been under scrutiny for, a powerful Democratic lobbyist. It is not, and Michael Flynn, it is not something you typically see federal charges for. This is another sign that Bob Mueller is working in an aggressive way with the laws available to him, not saying I'm going to give you a pass. And I'll just read briefly from count 10. It says, Paul Manafort and Richard Gates knowingly and willfully acted as agents of a foreign principal, the government of Ukraine, the party of the regions in Yanukovych, without registering.
Statistically, I think, and I may be off, I think there have been maybe 3 or 4 indictments under FARA and possibly no convictions, and this is since the 60s. I mean, we're talking about a tiny number. So that goes to Ari's point that the federal government is taking a page out of its own playbook, which is charge everything possible, and then you have a lot of leverage to do what you want to do next, which could be negotiate a cooperating witness agreement.
All right, you two keep digging. I want to bring Kristen Welker in live at the White House. Clearly a tense morning there. Kristen, what's the administration saying thus far?
So far, Steph, we're getting a discipline message out of the White House. Now, I want to point out we don't have anything on the record yet, but I spoke to an official earlier today who gave me this statement from a top White House official. The White House has been saying for weeks the special counsel is moving far more quickly and deliberatively than people have been reporting. The fact that the special counsel is actively performing its duties does not come as a surprise to the White House. Significant, Steph, because that is very counter to the messaging that we heard from the president himself over the weekend when he was tweeting a number of angry tweets saying that really the focus should be on Hillary Clinton, the fact that the Democrats funded that research that led to that now famous dossier. He, of course, continues to refer to this all as a hoax, but he's infuriated, Steph, because it's looming over his agenda. Remember,
Kristen,
on Wednesday...
Real quick, on the Democrats funding that dossier, did we not learn at the end of last week that the Washington Free Beacon, earlier, before Democrats funded it, they were funding it? The Washington Free Beacon, which is predominantly funded by Paul Singer, a giant hedge fund manager, a giant Republican who early on was a never Trumper and then turned the page and just a few months ago went and visited the president at the White House, has since gotten on board. He went to the inauguration and has since been to those very elaborate Trump fundraisers.
So what I'm hearing, Steph, the president's infuriated by that as well. Is he going to directly be taking aim at a top GOP donor? Not necessarily, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw allies unleash on him for engaging in that type of activity, for funding potential opposition research against the now president, who is then, of course, a very controversial candidate. But look, Steph, the bottom line is that President Trump wants to be focused on his agenda, tax reform. Republicans are going to unveil the specifics of their tax plan on Wednesday, and then the biggest foreign trip of his presidency to date. He is going to a 5-nation tour in Asia. He leads at the end of the week. This is the last headline that he or this administration wants to be dealing with. In terms of what we expect here at the White House today, Steph, I can tell you the president has a number of meetings with his top officials, the Secretary of State, the Defense Secretary, his Vice President. These are previously